Studying Christology along with the early church is an important and exciting task. In these discussions, we see some of the earliest thinking about the person and work of Jesus Christ. Surveying the first four councils of the early church can also be a helpful aid in our understanding of the task of Christology. The fourth council at Chalcedon is particularly important. At Chalcedon, the leaders and theologians of the early church reached a consensus about the most faithful ways to express what we believe about the one person of Jesus Christ. The document that was produced at this council is called the Definition of Chalcedon, and it represents the culmination of many years of hard thinking about who God is and who Jesus is. By this point in history, too, all the hard questions that can be asked of the Trinity and Jesus had been asked, and all the major mistakes had been made and answered. From the formulations of Chalcedon, we can articulate the boundaries for thinking about Jesus. We can think of the statements in the Definition of Chalcedon in terms of a box. We could call it the Chalcedonian Box. Each side of the box represents a Christological affirmation that identifies the outer boundaries of the biblical teaching about Jesus. These Chalcedonian categories can help us as we read the gospel narratives. So first, there's the upper boundary of the box. This represents the affirmation that Jesus is fully divine. Second, there's the lower boundary of the box. This represents the affirmation that Jesus is fully human. Third, there's the left boundary of the box. This represents the affirmation that Jesus is one person. And finally, there's the right boundary of this box, which represents the affirmation that Jesus has two natures. Together, these represent the major affirmations of the first four councils. Now, once we have these boundaries in place, we can see how they got there in the first place and also how they can be useful to us as interpreters. The upper boundary is established at the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. This council denied Arianism, which taught that Jesus was a creature created by the Father. Thus, Jesus was not fully God. The key theological assumption at this council was that only God can save us. If Jesus was not fully divine, then he could not save humanity, because as the scriptures teach, only God himself is mighty to save. This upper boundary was then firmly established. Jesus is fully divine. Now the lower boundary is established at the Second Council at Constantinople in 381 AD. This council denied Apollinarianism, which taught that Jesus had a human body, but not a human mind or a human soul. If what Apollinarius taught was true, then Jesus was not truly human. For the theologians at this council, this was unacceptable. The key theological assumption here was, what is not assumed is not healed. They reasoned like this: if every part of humanity was corrupted by sin, then Christ must assume every part of humanity in order to redeem it. In order for Jesus to save humanity, he must have had a human experience. This lower boundary was then firmly established. Jesus is fully human. The boundary on the left side is established at the Third Council at Ephesus in 431 AD. This council denied Nestorianism, which taught that Jesus' two natures were totally distinct. Nestorius seemed to treat Jesus' human nature and his divine nature as if they were two distinct persons. Led by Cyril of Alexandria, the theologians at this council argued that this was not acceptable. Rather, the one person of Jesus Christ was in fact the second person of the Trinity, the Word, God the Son. The focus here was on the mysterious union of humanity and deity in the one person of Jesus Christ, who is the Word that became flesh. This left side of the boundary is then firmly established. Jesus is one person. The final boundary is established at the Fourth Council at Chalcedon in 451 AD. This council denied Eutychianism, which taught that Jesus' two natures were mixed or confused. The leaders of this council argued that it was a mistake to think that Jesus' two natures were mixed or confused in the Incarnation. The key theological assumption here is that the one person of Jesus Christ has two natures. One of the key statements of the Definition of Chalcedon, then, is that Jesus is to be acknowledged in two natures without confusion, without change, without division, and without separation, the distinction of the natures being by no means taken away by the union, but rather the property of each nature being preserved and concurring in one person. In this statement, we can see the major insights of these four councils. The value of the Chalcedonian boundaries is that they help keep our thinking about Christ grounded in what the Gospels themselves affirm about the God-man, Jesus Christ. These boundaries are not simply arbitrary limits put on our thinking. Rather, they are the theological realities that we discover by reading the Gospels. So what's in the middle of the box? The biblical narratives themselves. In particular, the Gospel narratives of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These narratives are at the center of the box and are at the center of our thinking about Christology. From reading and rereading the Gospels, we know that these four major affirmations, are true. This is who we encounter in the Gospels: the God-man, Jesus Christ, the Word that became flesh and who dwelt among us. The discussions and formulations of the early church were designed to help us say right and true things about the Jesus that we read about in the Bible. Thus, their work can help us safeguard and treasure canonical Christology, and they help us maintain the mystery of the Incarnation.